We've got a congressional candidate running in New York's 5th district. Shaniyat Chowdhury, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, John, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great to have you here. This is the first time that we're talking, and I like to get to know the candidate, know what you're bringing to this race. I believe that this is your first run, correct?
Yes, it is definitely my first run. I come from a district where I am a working class American, and I'm running because I'm just sick and tired of working people being left outside the democratic process. And this race is about dismantling an oppressive system, and it requires to challenge those who enable it. And it all circles back to Gregory Meeks.
And so there you're referencing the current incumbent. So tell me, in advance of the decision to run, especially to challenge a sitting Democrat, what is some of your experience in politics?
Yeah, so I've actually interned through the New York State Assembly internship program, where I was legislative aide in the New York State Assembly in Albany. I did that for the 2017 session. And then shortly afterwards, I actually was a staffer for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign in 2018. And I volunteered for Tiffany Caban's district attorney race in Queens. And that's led me to where I am now.
So that first candidate, you're gonna have to tell me, I'm not familiar. I'm kidding. Look, that you're right in the sort of the center of these insurgent candidacies in New York. Obviously, one successful, one very close. So I'm curious, being involved with both of those candidacies, what are some of the takeaways that you would bring, that you're bringing both to your campaign, but also that you would bring to Congress?
Yeah, I mean, what I learned throughout that process was that you should never be afraid to stand up for what you believe in, for what is right, because we know that there's this Democratic establishment who are going to be divisive, and they're going to say everything that they can to make sure that working families do not stand up, that are not being part of the democratic process, because they have left us out for too long so they could continue to profit from corporations and Wall Street and to keep themselves in power.
You know, I wanted to ask you about one of the quotes that I saw, and I believe it was one of the early interviews when you were launching your race. It was, "We don't have to wait our turns." And one of the things that I've loved about some of these new freshman congresswomen, men too, it's almost all women, is that they're not interested in waiting, like biding their time, sitting in the back. You know, like they're passing legislation, they're doing protests in the halls of Congress. So tell me a little bit about that philosophy, about that not just sort of working your way up through the ladder the way it's always been done.
Right. I mean, coming from a working class background, we've seen that the politicians who are supposed to represent us have been there for way too long, and not enough people within the community actually know about them. I come from a district where the voter turnout is 2%.
Whoa.
And 2% in Democratic primary. So it shows you that no one knows who Gregory Meeks is, and our livelihood is actually in his hands, where he actually sits on the subcommittee on financial health services for consumer protection and financial institutions. So while he's supposed to protect working families, he's actually receiving $2 million per cycle from Wall Street. And we can't afford and we can't trust politicians who are completely bought off by Wall Street.
Okay, I definitely do have some questions I want to ask you about Gregory Meeks, but I'm curious. I want people to know, what sort of candidate you are. So, like, look ahead to, let's say you beat Meeks, you get your position in Congress eventually as well. What are some of the legislative efforts that you would want to be involved in the future if you made it into Congress?
For sure. So New York 5 is predominantly Southeast Queens, Jamaica, the Rockaways, and even parts of Nassau County, Valley Stream and Elmont. So we have Belmont, we have JFK Airport, and if any district that needs Medicare for all, Green New Deal, free public college tuition, it is New York 5. However, that is the standard. That is the most basic requirement to be a progressive Democrat. And for me, I'm running to raise that standard. New York 5 deserves a champion who will raise the bar. And as someone who, again, comes from a working class background, I feel like we need to recognize that us as a nation, we need to, right our wrongs. And that means we need to break up big banks and have public banks in place while transitioning to a more pro-democratic, more pro-labor economy. And most of whom our immigrant communities actually participate in. So we need to protect them while doing that. We need to abolish the prison industrial complex and decriminalize and expunge low-level offenses while reparating communities like New York 5. And lastly, we need to have moral clarity in the face of adversity. That means standing up with our Jewish allies and fight for Palestinian rights, fight for Kashmiris. And we could do that all while fighting Islamophobia, fighting anti-Semitism, fighting xenophobia, and it's going to require a collective effort.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up there because in the past, some candidates who aren't necessarily super strong progressives, but for a long time they're the best that we had, they might be good on some of these economic issues, but generally when it came to foreign policy, they either didn't prioritize it or might have been afraid to turn off some voters with controversial stances. Tell me a little bit more about your foreign policy.
Yeah, so my foreign policy is based on a specific human rights standpoint. So, us as a nation, we have infiltrated nations in Central America, in Africa, and in Asia, and we have completely demolished their way of life. And I feel like as a country, as a government, we have yet to be accountable. And even for slavery, it's been more than 200 years. We have yet to be held accountable for our actions. So when we look at foreign policy specifically, we need to get out of Central America and let the people have the democracy that they want. We need to look at the standpoint of Palestinian rights and see that it's a human rights issue. See that Israelis and Palestinians need to come together and come to a decision as to how they want to, live on this shared land. However, we have to recognize that Palestinians have been displaced, and the U.S. has played a huge role. And we need to really change our relations with other corrupt governments, such as Saudi Arabia, such as Israel, such as Egypt, and make sure that the money that we are giving them is not going to them anymore until they fix the problems.
So I know we don't have a ton of time to focus on necessarily, but the issues that you're talking about are in the news with the launch of Donald Trump's and Jared Kushner's peace plan. What's your initial take on some of the elements of that plan?
It is not a real peace plan. If a peace plan that does not include Palestinian rights, that is not a peace plan at all. And we're continuing on the same oppression that we've seen for more than a century now. And I think we need to have grassroots organizations who do fight for Palestinian rights, who do fight for Muslim rights at the forefront of this. So I think it's just ridiculous, and it's not the best way to go about this at all.
So now I do want to talk a little bit about the man currently holding the seat. Gregory Meeks is the current incumbent. And I thought it was interesting that you said earlier that you consider positions like supporting Medicare for all and the Green New Deal, that should be considered sort of like the foundation or the base level. What's interesting about him is that he actually he has signed on to both Medicare for all and the Green New Deal. Generally in the interviews that I do, that is not the case. And so tell me a little bit about running against a candidate that you don't believe is the sort of progressive the district deserves, who has at least signed on to some of these plans.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he signs, there's a lot of politicians like Gregory Meeks who signed on to legislation because of the House leadership deciding that is the popular thing to do, and it's under their order. And it's out of bad faith that they make these votes because they know at the end of the day that when you have a majority Republican Senate, that is not going to go through. And when we have to look at the deeper issue of that and see who is funding these politicians. So when you want to look at Gregory Meeks, even though he has signed on to Medicare for all, we have to look at his current fundraising pact with Colbert Kravis Roberts, who is an equity firm who are in the business of investing in oil and gas, also known as destroying our planet. They're also in the business of driving up healthcare costs for uninsured families. And lastly, they are in the business of displacing working families and stealing businesses from communities like in New York 5. So it's all in bad faith. And we know that the money is going to go into his pocket, and he's going to be lobbied by these groups to do their bidding. So when we have someone like Meeks, he likes to play politician by day, and he wants to be mediocre lobbyist by night, and that's just how it is. So we need to end the corruption, and it stops here. It stops with us, with our organizers, stops with our supporters, and we're going to take this to DC.
One thing that I find interesting is that you have this past experience working for candidates like, or at that point, candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and obviously you learned quite a bit from that. But I'm curious, did her win in that area, has that sort of put on notice some other incumbent Democrats? Like, do you get the impression that Gregory Meeks is approaching primary challenges maybe a little bit more seriously than he might have if AOC had not recently won?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's given a surge of a lot of grassroots organizers and people who've never been involved in the democratic process before, because that we have real people who are being elected to office that reflects the current needs of working families. And this is the real representation. So people are aware, and politicians, corrupt politicians like Gregory Meeks, are aware that his time is up.
So I know you recently got a pretty significant endorsement. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so not am I only endorsed by brand new Congress, but I was recently endorsed by Marianne Williamson, who was recently the Democratic candidate for president. And we're looking to do great things with her and do a lot of things within the district and get a lot of people involved and see that they could be a part of this and that they have a stake in this.
And if people want to find out more about your candidacy and your platform, where are some places they can find out about that?
For sure. We are actually tuning into more of the petition phase now within 3 weeks. So we do need volunteers. So please visit www.shaniyat2020.com. And you can email us at info@sean2020.com. Please come on volunteer. Our filing deadline for the FEC for this quarter is approaching tomorrow night at midnight. So please donate. We need all the help that we can get.
Hey, Shania, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting a chance to get to know you a little bit better.
Thank you, John. You have a good one.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below. Then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.